tax increment reinvestment zones. And so we're going to talk about TIRZs and TIFs and the like. So let's go ahead and begin. First off, let's talk about the guides to TIRZs. To begin with, let's review the four elements of the law that form tax increment reinvestment zones and tax increment financing or tax increment funds. We'll briefly touch on the Texas Constitution, Tax Code Chapter 311, authorizing what is permitted and required regarding the use, purpose, and function of a TIRZ, which was passed in 1987. There have been a couple of Attorney General opinions that have had an impact on counties in particular in recent years. Because of this uncertain situation surrounding counties' ability to create a TIRZ, this was resolved in 2021 when the Texas House passed H.J.R. 99 to put this issue on the ballot, which was passed in ballot proposition number 2. And since then, there have been a couple of counties that have now recently created TIRZs. Here you will see SB 2145 as presented by the author, State Senator Perry. And this Texas law allows for the creation of public improvement districts, PIDs, which are defined as a geographical area established to provide specific types of improvements or maintenance, which are financed by assessments against the property owners within the area. PIDs provide local governments with a development tool that allocates costs according to the benefits received. Similarly, a tax increment district or finance district is a geographical area established to allow local governments to invest in public infrastructure and other improvements up front. Local governments can then pay later for those investments. They do so by capturing the future anticipated increase in tax revenues generated by the project. SB 2145 allows PIDs and TIFs to hold any of their public meetings using a remote telecommunication device. However, at least one member of the district must be physically present at the meeting to ensure that the public can still attend a meeting in person, even if some of the members are participating remotely. SB 2145 amends current law relating to the authority of the advisory body of a public improvement district and the board of directors of a tax increment reinvestment zone to hold a meeting by a telecommunication device. Here, we'll look at some numbers about TIRZs. And what's going to be interesting about this is that the Comptroller Office collects all sorts of information and all sorts of numbers about TIRZs because statute requires the comptroller to be the central registry of such information. So here you will see that we have a number of TIRZs that are active all across the state. And these numbers have steadily gone up since 2020. So in 2020, we had 364 TIRZs all across the state. As of September of 2025, we're now at 491 TIRZs across the state. There are a number, these TIRZs are located in 74 counties. That does not mean these counties created TIRZ, it just means that these counties are located in 74 different counties. And again, these have gone up since December of 2020 when there were TIRZs in 59 different counties. Here we see the number of local governments that have created a TIRZ. And this too shows an increase in the number of local communities that are participating and creating a TIRZs. We're now at 209 taxing units that have created a TIRZ. 206 of these are cities and 3 are now counties, being Cameron County, which is down in the valley, Sabine County, which is out in East Texas, and Randall County up in the Panhandle where the Amarillo area is. And again, you'll see that these numbers have increased since 2020 when we had 165 taxing units, all of those at that time being cities that created a TIRZ. The next set of information, including this and the ones that'll show up momentarily, are all going to be bullet points on TIRZ facts. Just interesting little tidbits, such as the city with the most TIRZs is Houston, having 27. The cities, the 5 smallest cities in Texas that have created a TIRZ would include Iowa, Colony, Aubrey, Wolfworth, Sansom, and Palmview. So as you can see, this is not a big city project or a big city meant for big cities as an incentive. You got small, big, medium-sized cities, as well as now counties participating. The next set of numbers shows, for example, the smallest size TIRZs. So a TIRZ doesn't have to be hundreds of acres big. It can be small in size, such as the city of Austin has 2 of these, one being 5 acres and another being 14. You got cities like Sherman having a TIRZ that's with 22 acres, Trophy Club with 6 acres. So you'll see all kinds and types of cities and counties participating because there's a benefit to them as afforded to them by statute and outlined in the criteria. So let's look at numbers of communities by project type. And again, these are just a few sampled communities all across Texas that are participating in TIRZ and using the TIRZ for these type of public projects. So you'll see Abilene, Allen, and Amarillo doing affordable housing. You'll see Salina, Corpus Christi, and Hutto doing transit projects. You'll see Aledo, Belton, and DeSoto doing road work, and there's 340 such communities all across Texas doing this. You'll see 27 different taxing units across Texas participating in historical preservation, such as Selma, Sunnyvale, Terrell, and Tomball. You'll see 205 taxing units participating in some type of economic development across Texas, including places like Seagoville, Sinton, South Padre, Sugarland, and Taylor. And then you'll see another 348 cities participating in water, sewer, and drainage, such as Mansfield, Midland, New Braunfels, and Randall County, to name just a few of them. So let's briefly talk about what is a TIF and what is a TIRZ. There is a distinct difference between the two terms. A lot of people will use these two terms interchangeably or synonymously, but there is a distinct difference between the two terms. Tax increment financing, or a TIF, is a financing method that local governments can use to pay for public project improvements that will draw private investment to the area. It can also refer to the term as tax increment fund, where the money that is set aside that is above the base value and taken out of the captured appraised value and moved to the tax increment fund, separate from a local taxing unit's GR fund. And that money is kept separate to use to pay for public project improvements. The purpose of a tax increment zone, or the idea of a TIRZ, is just simply the boundaries of the zone. What boundaries have been identified as meeting the criteria as set out by statute that would fall not only in the zone, but have been determined by the local government to be worthwhile and feasible going forward based on previous history over the previous 5 to 10 years, and drawing or increasing tax increments on that property that can be used for the TIF fund. So what are the benefits of a TIRZ? First is that, if I could get my clicker to work, construct needed public infrastructure in areas that lack development to attract businesses. Secondly, is to encourage development, thereby increasing property values and long-term property tax collections. Third is to provide reimbursement for eligible public improvements, thereby reducing the cost of private development. Fourth is to control development through strategic planning, zoning, and controlled development. So let's do some real life scenario analyzing here. We'll use Austin as our example. First, Austin's job growth, zoning ordinances, and home values have over the last couple of decades driven out a lot of blue collar and working class individuals from the community and pushed a lot of these individuals to communities that are on the edges, such as Pflugerville, Manor, Elgin, Bastrop, Kyle, places like that are on the edges due to affordability issues. An example of this, as I mentioned a moment ago, is Pflugerville, which has become a predominantly suburban housing community. So when you drive through Pflugerville, you're not going to see a whole lot of warehousing, you're not going to see a whole lot of industry there, but you will see a lot of suburban housing in Pflugerville. Another example of this is that communities in Williamson and Hayes counties are busting at the seams, thereby resulting or creating a lot of spillover growth. So now you'll see a lot of businesses moving into, for example, Georgetown, Round Rock, Buda, Kyle, San Marcos, Bastrop, places like that, because the growth in Austin is so significant, so intense, that there's maybe not enough space, not enough room. Maybe the incentives in Austin aren't as attractive, or as maybe they are in the suburban areas. Evidence of this spillover growth, as you see here, is impacting surrounding communities. And that this results in the arrival of new businesses such as Tesla, Boring, the Circuit of the Americas, and an increased development in the Austin airport area. This will drive growth further south and east of Austin and to its surrounding communities, such as Manor, Bastrop, and Lockhart. There are two ways to go about creating a TIRZ. The first option can be where a group of citizens with property comprising of at least 50% of the zone's appraised value, as confirmed by the most recent certified appraisal rolls, can petition the governing body of a city or county. Now, this is sometimes led by a developer with interest in such a zone, since they typically have property within the proposed zone, and this would be accompanied by or with a pre-designated project plan that they would present. Whether a group of citizens or it's developer-led, this section of the statute has been rarely used. Although it has been used, it's not very often. The option that is most frequently used is this option here, where there's a city or county that has opted to take the lead in creating a TIRZ when passing an order or ordinance and seeing a need to make a number of improvements to the defined area that is falling apart, dilapidated, unsanitary, or some other reason as permitted by statute. Typically, the lead taxing unit will prepare a preliminary finance plan to determine the feasibility and viability of a TIRZ. If such a preliminary determination is made, the governing body will schedule a hearing, which would be open to the public. This option, as we saw in the previous slide, has been used by numerous cities and counties. At some point during the calendar year, your TIRZ will take effect after the governing body approves of the creation of a TIRZ, with defined boundaries and agreeing to dedicate some percentage of the tax increment into the TIF fund. As you see on the first slide on the top left, typically a TIRZ and the local government taxing unit will begin their budget hearing process and hold hearings setting about the tax rate for the next fiscal year. In our example, we're starting with July 1 of 2022. The next slide, or the next square, middle left, it shows that the lead taxing unit and the TIRZ, and generally it'll be the lead taxing unit taking the lead, since the TIRZ typically isn't in effect yet, beginning the budget process and setting their tax rate. And typically this begins around August. In our example, it'll be August of 2022. Next box down on the bottom left, we see that come September, the local governing taxing unit approves their budget and what tax rate they will set. In this bottom center box, then as of October 1, the budget and tax rate that were approved are now taking effect for the new calendar or budget year. In the middle box come January 1 of the next year, in this case of our example of 2023. Any TIRZ that is approved typically take effect at this moment in time, because that's when most local governments opt to begin the TIRZ at the beginning of the new year. Top center box, as of May 1 of 2023, that next calendar year, property owners will get a note or notice from the appraisal district of their property's appraised value. This notice will show any exemptions on that property that were reported to the appraisal district from the local taxing unit. Failure to report this information to the CAD in a timely manner can impact the implementation of the TIRZ. Next box over, top right, come October 1 of that next year, tax bills are sent to all property owners, including those within the TIRZ. Center right box, January 31 of the new year, property taxes on the business will be due. Taxes may on a property within the boundaries of a TIRZ may go up or down based on the tax rate that is set and the property valuations by the appraisal district. being in a TIRZ with whatever tax increment that is approved has zero effect on the tax rate. Let me repeat that again. Being in a TIRZ with whatever tax increment that is approved has zero effect on the tax rate. Because public project improvements are made within the zone from year to year, property valuations may increase, thereby potentially increasing a property owner's tax bill. Remember, the tax increment that is captured as remitted to the TIF fund would in other years not be in a TIRZ have gone directly into the lead taxing unit's general revenue budget account. The bottom right box, February of 2024. Come February of that new year, ad valorem taxes that are collected are remitted to the local taxing units with jurisdiction over that property, including the TIRZ, so they can carry out their public services to the citizens. So as you see, from beginning to end, it takes roughly a year and a half from the approval of the TIRZ to the monies eventually making it into the TIF fund account of that new TIRZ. When a municipality or county creates a TIRZ, it records the total taxable value of all real property within the zone. This is a snapshot of the zone's base value. So let's go through each element in a clear manner. First, in our example, the TIRZ is approved for 25 years. So let's assume that for our example scenario here, the TIRZ is created in the year 2014, and that this TIRZ has an X number of acres, whether it's, let's say, for giggles, it's 100 acres, and these acres are valued at $1.5 million. That's your base value. That is going to be represented by that long rectangular purple square or rectangular base there. That's the base value. And that is the amount that the local government is going to be able to fully collect their taxes on and collect their taxes on for all 25 years, that $1.5 million guaranteed. Next, we see on that upward sloping line, that upward sloping line represents the total appraised value. And in our example here, the value of that same 100 acres is now $4 million. And that value can be increased in value, can be for any number of reasons. It can be because that there have been a lot of public project improvements that have made significant impacts on properties. It can be because maybe abatements have been given to one or more businesses to locate there. It can be because there's been a number of people moving in because of the development. It can be because of increased inflation in the area, or any combination of those factors can contribute to the value being $4 million. What we see here is that middle area between the base value and the total appraised value. That middle area is referred to as the captured appraised value, the $2.5 million increase, the $2.5 million. That amount is going to be the amount you're going to work with or dedicate a tax increment that you, the local taxing unit, will agree to if you opt to create a TIRZ. you're going to dedicate some percentage of that captured appraised taxes and move that dedicated amount to the TIF fund. That dedicated amount can be anywhere from 1% up to 100% or some percentage in between for those 25 years that you, the local government, agreed to. Now, assuming that the local government, decide not to extend the term of the TIRZ, the TIRZ will end after 25 years, and the monies from that captured appraised value, those tax increments, will now start, instead of flowing to the TIF fund, will now start flowing into the local government's general revenue account. So let's do the math on this. And here we see that there's the appraised value of $1.5 million, as we indicated a moment ago. Let's assume that the taxing jurisdiction's tax rate is 0.7733 per $100 valuation, and that the local government agrees to dedicate 50% of the captured appraised value into the TIF fund. So we see here that the taxes owed based on the base value that and that will eventually go to the GR fund is $11,600. So how do we get that number? Well, we take the 0.7733 and multiply that by the 1.5 million, and that'll give us a number. And whatever that number is, we divide that by 100, and that $100 valuation, and that gives us $11,600 that is collected based on the base value, and that money is then sent into the GR fund. So what does this portend for money to be sent to the TIF fund? Well, in this case, it's nothing, because there's nothing in terms of the captured appraised value. There's been no public project improvements done, nothing done yet in 2014. And so there's nothing to move over. In 2024, 10 years later, the value is now $4 million. That's the only thing that has changed in our scenario. The tax rate is the same. The percentage dedicated to the TIF fund is the same. Everything is the same other than the assessed value. So what does that mean in terms of the money going to the TIF fund? Well, if the tax rate is the same, then what we're doing is we're multiplying the 0.7733 times not the 4 million, but times the 2.5 million, the captured appraised value. And that'll give you a number. You take that number and divide that by 100 for the valuation, and then you take that next number and divide that in half, because you agreed to dedicate 50% of that collected taxes and move that into the TIF fund. And then the other 50% will go into the taxing unit's GR fund. So the taxes then collected on the captured appraised value is $19,333. You divide that in half between the GR fund and the TIF fund, and that gives you $9,666.50. I believe we have a question. Go ahead, Jake.
Yes, sir. Mike Sly asks, can a public improvement project extend beyond the TIRZ zone?
A public project improvement can extend beyond the TIRZ zone, provided that that public project improvement is being done adjacent to the TIRZ zone and in another TIRZ zone that is adjacent to the existing TIRZ zone. So you can't do the project like on the far end of another zone. You can't do it outside of the zone where there's no other TIRZ zone. It's got to be in an existing TIRZ zone, and it's got to be adjacent to the TIRZ zone where you're taking that money from the TIRZ zone and moving it elsewhere. So let's look at this. So we have development. And so you have money to start with in the tax increment fund. And so that money that's used to create new development over a period of time, hopefully then increases then property values in and around and near that area where the development or the public project improvements are occurring. With that should hopefully then increase the amount that you're collecting in tax increments on that from that captured appraised value, which then allows you to potentially, if you wish to do increased public project improvements in that area or other areas within that TIRZ zone. So as we see here, there are 4 different financing options. Before I begin that, I believe Jake has a question. Go ahead, Jake.
This is a pretty long one, but Jacob Serrano says, when there are documented violations of labor or environmental laws by a company with an economic development agreement like Chapter 381, does the Comptroller's Office have a role in determining the company's eligibility for the benefits of the agreement? So answer that, and then there's a kind of follow-up. And
well, I'll get to the follow-up, but well, you're asking a 381 question, but typically, as opposed to a TIRZ question, but typically under any of these economic development tools, the comptroller has zero role in anything in terms of economic development, in terms of legal enforcement, in terms of environmental studies. We have no role in any of that. If there are questions about that, you certainly would need to take that up with the lead taxing units that are involved in this, maybe their legal counsel, maybe if there's certainly legal questions that the local governing body that's responsible for this TIRZ is not responding to, you might want to take that to the county or district attorney or to the Texas Attorney General's office.
So there's another question after this, but there's several questions. But the follow-up to Mr. Serrano's question, or maybe this will inform part of it, is he says, I'm concerned about violations by the Colorado River Project documented in the press and by OSHA. Documents were requested from the Travis County PBO about whether these would impact compliance status, but nothing substantive was provided. I was told this is because the compliance review is, quote, in progress.
Well, I'll go back to my previous response. This does not sound like a TIRZ question, Tax Increment Reinvestment Zone question. And even if it's somehow directly or indirectly related to a TIRZ, any of these economic development tools that we're going to be talking about today, the comptroller has no role in terms of legal enforcement or environmental studies on any of this. And so I would redirect you to those other sources that I mentioned a moment ago.
And so there are 2 more questions. Farrell Otieno asks, can TIRZ participation be considered a, quote, local match or support factor when evaluating applications for state incentives?
For state and local incentives, I would need to know more about those, what we're referring to in terms of state and local incentives, if we're talking about something beyond the TIRZ. Typically, if you go back to the early slides, one of the early slides when I talked about what is a TIRZ, The primary purpose of a TIRZ is nothing more than setting aside future dollars from the captured appraised value as tax increments, moving that to the TIF fund, and using that money to make public project improvements. That is all a TIRZ is. Nothing more, nothing less.
And then there is a question from Andrew Freeman, who says, when it comes to the annual tax rate calculations municipalities have to fill out and the difference between existing growth and quote new property values, does that factor into TIRZ collections? And he says, for example, I've seen cities that will delay contributing taxes from new property development into the zone until it is on the tax roll for 2 years due to a tax collections worksheet. The first year taxes have remained with the participating tax entities on new property development. And I can repeat the physical question.
Okay, I would believe that the form you're referring to is the Truth in Taxation form. And that form is out of our property tax office, property tax assistance office. And I would direct you to a gentleman in that office, and you can contact either me or Jake to get this person's phone number or email. And that is Stephen Rothstein.
I can put it in the chat.
And Jake is going to put that in the chat, and it's going to be stephen.rothstein@cpa.texas.gov, because they're the ones responsible for that truth and taxation form. Now, how that is going to be calculated and its impact, I would redirect you to him on that. But normally, the math, as I laid out, that's the basic formula on how the tax increments are collected and what should be moved over to the TIF fund. That's the basic formula. With that, we'll go ahead and move on to TIRZ financing options. So in using tax increments in the TIF fund, first, traditional TIRZ financing can occur under one of these scenarios, such as using tax increments in the TIF fund to make payments directly. So this is going to be very important when you create a TIRZ. You want to make sure you put the right properties in the boundaries of the TIRZ. Not every property deserves or needs to be in a TIRZ. Some properties, even though they meet statutory criteria, maybe because of certain economic circumstances, maybe because of its location or other factors, maybe need not be included in the TIRZ. And so that's why when you are considering approving a TIRZ, you need to do an evaluation of each and every piece of property that you're considering over and see what those values have been over the last 5 to 10 years, what the causes, positive or negative effects on those properties have been over the last 5 to 10 years, and then project out over the next 5 to 10 years what that same property may or may not incur in terms of potentially increased values or not. Second is municipality issuing tax increment bonds. And there are not all, but a fair number of taxing units that have issued tax increment bonds to pay for these public project improvements. Third is that a municipality can create what's called a local government corporation. Now, you won't see very many taxing units do this. To my knowledge, there's only 2 that are doing it, and that is the cities of Houston and Dallas. And that's because these 2 entities have numerous taxing units. If you remember, the city of Houston has about 27 TIRZs. And so a local government corporation assists such a city in terms of managing the TIRZ, but it also gives the ability of that local government corporation at their discretion to issue tax increment bonds, and not very many taxing units want to give up that authority to another independent entity. Fourthly is what's referred to as tax increments being used as a pledge of security. And the proceeds, which are then used to pay for tax increment reinvestment zone improvements. And then lastly is that a TIRZ can enter into an agreement with a private developer to construct tax increment reinvestment zone improvements. The developer then agrees to construct and pay for the cost of construction of a particular TIRZ improvement. In turn, the TIRZ agrees to reimburse the developer for the project costs of such TIRZ improvements, if and when the funds are available for such a purpose. Thus, the financial risk is shifted from the TIRZ to the developer, if not completely, then at least in part to some degree, based on whatever the local government and the developer agree upon. With TIF funds may be used for any project considered necessary or convenient to execute the project and finance plans. With the approval of the TIRZ, and the governing body then uses the funds from the TIRZ that can use these for statutorily defined projects, such as railroad or transit facilities, roadwork, water, sewer, drainage, parks, transit, parking, affordable housing, economic development, to name a few. And if those don't meet any of your needs, fear not, there's other opportunities, but you need to, in this case, have 2 or more of these conditions to then create a TIRZ, such as the funds generated by a TIRZ could be used outside the zones in limited circumstances, such as acquisition costs of real property for right-of-way or easement needs to build right-of-way or infrastructure, development rights or conservation easement in land if it is served by rail, transportation, or bus transit projects, constructing or reconstructing an educational facility, to name a few. And then there's areas of public assembly. Go ahead, Jake. We have a question.
Cheney Gamboa asked, she said, I may have missed this, but what is the process for issuing TIRZ bonds? Where does the debt burden lie, and does it impact the property tax rate?
The TIRZ bonds could impact the tax rate, certainly. And so that would have to be part of your preliminary finance plan that you would have to first develop and then create a formal finance plan afterwards. And what were the other elements of that, Jake?
What is the process for issuing TIRZ bonds, and where does that burden?
The process of issuing TIRZ bonds would be the same process of issuing municipal bonds for any other reason, COs or general certificates of obligation, things like that, follow the same process.
And where does that debt burden lie?
The debt burden, well, it depends on if you're talking about municipal bonds or TIRZ bonds, it would work the same way as COs, GOs. So you'd follow the same method there. So what is the process for beginning the TIRZ process? Well, step 1 is, as I alluded to, preparing a preliminary finance plan. This here is probably the most important step here. The creation of a TIRZ includes a number of planning, feasibility studies, legal and strategic considerations. These issues should be considered at the beginning of the process to avoid a waste of time, effort, and expense. Hence, the first step of the process is to begin putting together a preliminary finance plan. This can include the formation process and politics. First is knowing the process of putting together a TIRZ and being aware of the politics surrounding the issue. What are the existing plans, goals, and codes? What would be some of the benefits to the people, benefits within the TIRZ, and the larger community as a whole? Who are the leaders and stakeholders that may be for and against the formation of a TIRZ? What would be perhaps any legal ramifications? What would be some of the costs for the proposed improvements? Next in the planning process is what's known as upfront TIF sizing. And this is an analysis of the revenues and determining if those revenues support the proposed plan of public project improvement expenditures. If your wish list is too large and needs to be scaled back, and you need to ask yourself, do some of the desired projects need to be spaced out over time? Do some of those projects need to be reconsidered or deleted from consideration? What kind of projected revenues, would each property in the proposed TIRZ look like over the next 5 to 10 years as well? And then there's what's known as site-specific versus project-specific TIRZs. And this here is in the process of reviewing, underwriting, and structuring a TIF transactions. The taxing units should consider expenditures in terms of the whole site or more limited to specific projects. Taxing units should thoroughly understand the project and propose expenditures to accurately size the TIRZ district when it is created by doing the following, such as review the proposed plan for public project improvements, reviewing and developing cost estimates for the improvements with built-in contingencies, and carefully underwriting the TIF amount to determine whether that amount is sufficient or excessive. Next is determining the TIF or TIRZ boundary. A significant factor in the success of the TIRZ is fixing of the boundaries of the TIRZ. Determining the boundaries of the TIRZ should factor in these considerations, such as how can the TIF be used to provide key projects with derived resources without locking up future revenues. Secondly, what revenue sources can be generated within the TIRZ to make sure it can pay for the anticipated cost. Third, consider each individual property, whether they should be in the TIRZ or be a benefit to the TIRZ. Working with other affected taxing jurisdictions. And this is important in consideration. You need to ask yourself, would the inclusion of one or more taxing units as a participating taxing unit help generate a significant amount of tax increments into the TIF fund in future years? You also want to consider working with other taxing units because it could potentially impact their communities, especially if the TIRZ zone or TIRZ projects would be adjacent to or near the boundaries of those other taxing units. Would the creation of a TIRZ impact traffic patterns in adjacent areas and communities? Are there other projects underway in adjacent taxing units and zones? Could the inclusion of a taxing unit as a participating taxing unit in the TIRZ meet a need of thereby ensuring some of the TIF funds going towards a project that they have in mind? So keep this in mind. So that brings up steps 2 and 3. Step 2 is the publishing of the hearing notice. And here, there is no specific word requirement. The minimum time frame is 7 days advance notice of the meeting for the public notice to be published. Step 3 is holding the hearing. And so all you need to do is hold the hearing, give ample opportunity to people to speak for and against, and determine if the TIRZ needs to go forward or not. Keep in mind, when you give the public notice and hold the hearing, you need to also give plenty of advance notice or advance built-in time. You need to give in some built-in extra time to other affected taxing jurisdictions, so they can then consider what they need to do on their end, if anything at all, or if they need to consider participating with you in the TIRZ project. So make sure to build in plenty of time in the public notice and the hearing for this. That brings up step 4. The designation of the zone. Step 4 is when the ordinance comes before the governing body to begin considering the creation of a TIRZ. The comptroller has established proper TIRZ zone naming standards or guidelines to properly name a TIRZ and to prevent some funky names and to keep TIRZ names similarly aligned throughout the state. And we'll be talking about proper zone naming standards later in this presentation, and you can also find the zone naming standards on our website. Thirdly is that if the governing body does approve the creation of the TIRZ, then the lead taxing unit needs to submit to the comptroller the appropriate online new TIRZ form, and you can find that on our website. So what are the zone naming standards? These zone naming standards are going to be very similar for TIRZs as they are for the naming of a reinvestment zone under Chapter 312 for abatements. So what are those? First off, the name of a zone. The first part of the name of the zone can take the name of the taxing unit. It can take the name of a subdivision in the area. It can take the name of a business in that area. The second part of the name of the zone must include the acronym TIRZ or Tax Increment Reinvestment Zone in the name in order to differentiate this zone from other zones, because there are other zones known as reinvestment zones as approved of under Chapter 312 for abatements. There are enterprise zones that's approved of under the government code and also recognized under Chapter 312 abatements. So we need to differentiate this type of zone from other zones. Next is that there may be a need for a numbering convention. So if you have 2 or more TIRZs in your community or in your taxing jurisdiction, you may need to name the TIRZ as TIRZ Zone 1, TIRZ Zone number 2, TIRZ Zone number 3, TIRZ Zone 11, TIRZ Zone 12, etc. So keep that in mind. You cannot use the order, ordinance number, the date, or use CO for company or LLC in the TIRZ name. It needs to follow these prescribed standards that we are outlining here. As you see below at the bottom is the examples of a properly named TIRZ, such as Dallas Tax Increment Reinvestment Zone 1, Reinvestment District, or Reunion District TIRZ 1, or Reunion District TIRZ 2. So that would suggest the name of a subdivision. Verizon TIRZ, which would suggest the name of a business. Granbury TIRZ number 23. That would suggest that the city of Granbury has multiple TIRZs. Cook County TIRZ. That's a name of a TIRZ that the county of Cook County has named, as opposed to a city. So that gives you a brief idea of properly formatted TIRZs or TIRZ names. So what is the criteria to creating a TIRZ zone? First off, you can create a TIRZ based on any one of these criteria, such as where the tax delinquency exceeds the fair value of the land. Another way of phrasing that is where there's more owed on that property than what it's worth. So you may see maybe a financial institution, a developer take over a dilapidated piece of property, or maybe no one is living in that property and taking it over to fix it up. Thereby, a potential property owner, a new property owner could take over and thereby pay taxes on it. Deteriorated structures could be part of it. Inadequate sidewalk streets, poor platting, unsanitary, unsafe conditions, deterioration of the site, defective or unusual site conditions. And then what you see here as this last bullet is that conditions that endanger life or property by fire or disaster. This is the only criteria in this list for Chapter 311 that is different than what is seen in the criteria for Chapter 312. The only bullet that is different. All the others are worded exactly the same. Now, if these conditions do not meet, fear not, there's other opportunities. But to do so, you need to then meet 2 or more of these conditions, such as it must be in a federally assisted new community, located in a home rule city, has impaired growth, sign relocation, such as there's a lot of unsightly signs or billboards that you want to relocate or get rid of, etc. Step 5 is submitting a new TIRZ form. Soon after the local taxing unit approves the creation of the TIRZ, the entity is required to go to the comptroller's e-system and use their assigned access ID code to enter the system. The entity must also send an online annual report every year until the zone expires or is terminated. Attach all required documents as a single PDF file and upload these documents into the system. Step 6A, appointing a TIRZ board and the composition of a TIRZ board. There can be a minimum of 5, maximum of 15 members. At least 1 member per participating taxing unit, at least 1, or not at least, only 1. Only the participating unit can appoint only 1 person to the TIRZ board. That means the lead taxing unit can appoint up to a maximum of 10 individuals to serve on the TIRZ board. Other participating taxing units can have a combined total of 5. That means you can have 5 participating units. Each participating taxing unit gives you or makes an appointment of 1 individual. So if you have 5 participating taxing units and the lead taxing unit appoints 10 individuals, That gives you your maximum of 15. Each member serves 2 years. Terms are staggered. The lead taxing unit would appoint the chairman to the board, and that the board themselves would pick someone from amongst themselves to serve as the vice chair of the board. So that brings up 6B. And you need to, at minimum, have all these as a part of your preliminary finance plan and final finance plan. And that must include the description and map showing the existing proposed, or not finance plan, but project plan, I should say. Description and map showing existing and proposed uses of property, proposed changes to zoning ordinances and the master plan. A list of estimated non-project costs to name the 3 of the 4 that are required by statute. 6B is the finance plan as required by statute. And all these that you'll see here on the list are required. Doesn't mean that you, the city or county, can't impose other requirements, but this is the minimum as required by statute, such as detailed list of estimated project costs, or the bond indebtedness estimate to be incurred, annual estimated captured appraised value of the zone. It can include the current total appraised value of the taxable real property or the duration of the zone. Steps 7 through 9. Step 7 is the lead taxing unit may enter into an agreement at any time before or after the zone is designated. After the board of directors and the governing body has approved the project plan and finance plan and the reinvestment zone, the other taxing units with property within the zone may set the percentage of their increased tax that would be dedicated to the tax increment fund. Step 8 is the creation of a separate TIF fund. And then each taxing unit would then collect those funds separate from their GR fund. That's that amount based on the captured appraised value. And then those monies are then sent and directed and deposited into the TIF fund to be monitored by the TIRZ board. Step 9, and that is that the lead taxing unit that is responsible for creating this TIRZ would then be responsible for not only the reporting the creation of the TIRZ, but then would also be responsible for reporting the annual report to the comptroller on our e-system electronic reporting tool. Any taxing unit except the school district can approve abatements. So you can have cities and counties approving an abatement. And so you could have, in this case, the lead taxing unit approving an abatement that's within the TIRZ zone. But before that happens, the TIRZ board would meet and approve the approval of the abatement. And once they review and approve, then the governing body then would give its consent and approval. But it must go through both bodies before the abatement can take effect. The termination of the TIRZ. A TIRZ can be terminated when these 2 things occur as per Tax Code Section 311.017, such as on the date the taxing unit that created the zone sets as the termination date by order or ordinance, or when or that all project costs, tax increment bonds, interest on those bonds, and obligations have been paid in full, then the TIRZ can terminate or close, whether on time or early, but without making sure that all bonds, notes, bills, and obligations have been paid in full, the TIRZ cannot terminate. If there are any remaining monies that are in excess remaining in the TIRZ after the TIRZ terminates, then those monies would be returned to each taxing unit that participated in the TIRZ in proportion to the amount that they paid into the TIRZ fund for the period of time that they participated in the TIRZ. That brings up zone development and enlargement. Here, the city creates the TIRZ. In our example, it'd be on the southeast corner of Abilene, and that would be fine. A few years later, they decide to expand the boundaries of the TIRZ. And as you see in our example, it would be referred to as the 13th Street subzone. And then a few years later, they approve an abatement, which is fine and dandy that they can do that. And then a few years after that, they expand the boundaries of the TIRZ further on the southeast side of the original zone. So now keep in mind, you have 3 subzones: the original subzone, the 13th Street subzone, and the Treadway subzone. Each of these, when you make a report to the comptroller, are going to have their own base values reported. Each of them are going to have their own captured appraised values reported, and each of them are going to have their total appraised values reported. And then you would have then a grand total for the entire zone as a grand total. So keep that in mind. So what is the comptroller's role in all this? Well, the comptroller's role is limited to these 3 things. As required by statute, as I showed earlier, with all those numbers that we collect, we're required to be the central registry for all TIRZs. That's number 1. Number 2 is the comptroller is required to submit a report to the legislature and the governor no later than December 31 of each even-numbered year. So if you look at 2024, you'll see the last report that we submitted for TIRZs. And then our next report will be in 2020 for fiscal year 2026. And then the third thing that we're required to do is provide what's known as technical assistance. What is technical assistance? That means answering your phone calls, answering your emails, and also can mean if we're asked to do presentations, where possible, we'll do a presentation for you if we're able to, or do presentations like today's webinar. Go ahead, Jake. We have a question.
Janice Smith asks, what's included in the report?
Well, if we're talking about the creation of a new TIRZ, the new TIRZ that is created, what's going to be asked for is the acreage of the TIRZ, when the TIRZ takes effect, when the TIRZ expires, who created the TIRZ, the name of the TIRZ, and the base value of the TIRZ. And once you report that, keep in mind that number, the base value, does not ever change. Does not ever change. So when you report it, make sure that's your final number, because that can't change. And so, and I'll touch base on that. Well, I'll go ahead and talk about it here instead of the next slide. And that is, you're going to have the ability to report it 1 or 2 times. Statute says April 1 of the year following the year in which the TIRZ is created or modified is when you would report it. And that would be the maximum allowable time. The comptroller recommends, once you've gone through all the hard work at defining the boundaries and doing the preliminary project plan and preliminary finance plan and so forth on, that's the hard work. We're asking you then to submit this form to the comptroller reporting your base value on that form. So that's number 1. Number 2 is the annual report. The annual report, you report every year thereafter. And that will report projects you're doing that year, and that may change from year to year, as well as revenues collected, expenditures made or paid, and any carryover of monies from year to year, as well as any debt. And then the values of any and all subzones. You could have just one subzone, which is the original zone that you created, or you could have multiple subzones, as we saw in our example a moment ago, reporting those three sets of numbers: base value, captured appraised value, and total value.
One more question from Luis Mayo, who asks, what is the best practice for a TIF zone expansion regarding taxing jurisdictions? Does a county's commissioner's court need to accept the expansion via court order to participate?
Well, base value. Repeat the first part of the question.
Well,
Jake?
let's break it into two questions.
Yeah.
First question is, what is the best practice for a TIF zone expansion regarding taxing jurisdictions?
Well, if you do a TIRZ expansion, it would follow the same process as approving a brand new zone. So it'd follow the exact same process as we talked about a moment ago. So that should be easy to follow.
And those are those 9 steps.
Those 9 steps. Well, yeah, those 9 steps going from preliminary plan to approval, etc.
And the second question is, does a county's commissioner's court need to accept the expansion via court order to participate?
If I'm going to assume by that question that the city is the lead taxing unit that created the TIRZ or is going to create a TIRZ, which means a county can participate, a special purpose district can participate, such as a water district, a crime control district, a library district, a junior college, etc. So any other taxing jurisdiction can participate. Just because a taxing unit creates a TIRZ does not obligate any other taxing jurisdictions to participate. It is at their discretion to participate, and there is only one requirement for them to participate, and that requirement is that they must, by order or ordinance, vote to approve it and dedicate some percentage of a tax increment into the TIF fund. That is all. If you do that, then you're participating in the TIRZ. So what are the general reporting requirements? Well, as you see here, the first 2 check marks or bullets show that the contact info page and new TIRZ reporting form must be filled out on our e-system, that the order ordinance meets and bounds must be uploaded onto that form, that as well as the project plan and finance plan, and these are due by no later than April 1 of the year following the year in which the zone is designated. If you are modifying the TIRZ, you've already created the TIRZ a year or 2 or 5 or 10 years later, you come back to modify the TIRZ. Whether you're changing the term of the TIRZ, whether you're increasing or decreasing the size of the TIRZ, that's considered a modification. And hence, again, you would need to update the contact info page, fill out the online modified TIRZ form, upload the following forms onto the system, such as the order ordinance that approve these, the meets and bounds, the project plan and finance plan. And again, that is due by or before April 1 of the year following the year in which the zone is amended. The annual report. Again, you would fill out the contact info page, which is separate. You would submit also the annual report online form, and then attach to it the annual report form, which could be an abbreviated CAFR or annual report for the TIRZ, and that is due on or before the 150th day after the city's fiscal year. Note, you would need to attach all required documents as a single PDF, not separate, but all the documents as a single PDF and upload it to the system. The responsible party for this is the taxing unit that created the TIRZ, the lead taxing unit. And then, as I indicated a moment ago, you're already doing the hard work up front and doing the project plan, the finance plan, the orders, ordinances, etc. So if you can submit these within 30 to 60 days, if you can. And then you can go on to the Comptroller e-system at this address and fill out the online forms as required. And here is my contact info. You can see my manager's name up there as well, Russell Gallahan. So those would be the proper contacts for this program, or Jake, who's part of this program.